Data protection and privacy teams are under more pressure than ever with new laws, AI oversight, data breaches, and the constant expectation to do more with fewer resources.
That's why TrustArc built a modern privacy and data protection management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. It unifies your tools, automates the work that slows you down, and surfaces what matters most right when you need it.
From guided quick actions to our intelligent assistant, Ask Arc, you get credible, contextual answers backed by expert research, not generic AI guesses.
Finally, privacy that works the way privacy pros work.
Learn how TrustArc helps teams move faster with confidence at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.
You're listening to Serious Privacy, powered by TrustArc. Here are your hosts, Dr. Kay Royal and Paul Breitbart.
I don't know about you, but when studying law at university, there were a few topics I really disliked. Criminal procedural law was one, possibly because I just did not get along with my professor. But the other one was contract law. And sure, I saw the need of good contracts, but to talk about contracting week over week over week, maybe I should have paid more attention, because as a data protection lawyer, contracts are also part of my daily bread and butter. And assessing vendors, pushing back on so-called non-negotiable data processing agreements, ensuring agreements are even submitted for review. And yes, we have talked about contract reviews and vendor management before, but there is more to be told. Our guest today is Cathleen Doyel, who is the Deputy General Counsel at TrustArc. And Cathleen has a long background as a contract lawyer, so I'm sure she will be able to give us some pointers on what to look out for when dealing with new vendors or existing ones for that matter. That and some updates on the big data protection news of the week in this week's episode of Serious Privacy. My name is Paul Breitbart.
And I'm Ralph O'Brien. And I guess it falls to me to say, welcome to Serious Privacy.
Absolutely. It falls to you. Kay may join later, but we are recording on an irregular day for scheduling issues. So we'll see whether she can make an appearance. Cathleen, welcome so much to the podcast. We're happy to have you.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me.
So how long have you been with TrustArc and how long have you been dealing with privacy contracting?
I joined TrustArc in February of 2023, so coming up on a year and a few months, and have been mainly focused on privacy aspects of contracting since I would say about 2018, when I was with a company that was focused in the ed tech space.
So this is indeed your daily bread and butter.
Yes.
The EdTech space must be absolutely fascinating, by the way. I was dealing with an app for children doing their homework and things like that with schools the other day, and one that decided to try and serve adverts to the parents as well. Absolutely fascinating, because it's sort of where EdTech meets AdTech. And, do parents have a choice when, processing data where the school just gives them an app that they have to use, right? Do you mind me asking what sort of EdTech, to narrow it down?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started with a company called Schoology. They were a LMS platform, and we were purchased by PowerSchool, which was a broader ed tech provider. So it provided a number of different things from curriculum to scoring and to LMS as well.
Beautiful. Yeah, so that's going to be really interesting, because then you're dealing with the evaluation of students. I know the purpose of this call is to talk about contracts, but the idea of sort of performative evaluations of individuals online through learning management systems, I've always found fascinating as to whether that genuinely detects people's performance or whether it's just held and day.
Yep. No, I think that's certainly an interesting topic. Not one that I really focused on during my time at either, but something just for food for thought to think about.
So plenty of contracts involved either way.
So before we dive into the deeper discussion, let's start, as always, with our unexpected question. Cathleen, starting with you, if you could make an office rule that everybody had to follow for a day, what would it be?
Oh boy. For everyone had to follow for a day. Let's say this is assuming that we are in office or assuming that we're in a, more remote space.
Let's assume we are in office.
I would say meetings have to end on time, because I've been, I think we all have certainly, experienced the repercussions from this meeting runs late, so this meeting starts late. So it just becomes like a train effect down the line. And at the end of the day, you're starting 15 minutes early and ending 30 minutes late. So I would say everybody has to hard stop on the time that they were supposed to stop on.
It's like the dentist's office, right?
My dad was a dentist, so maybe that has something to do with it. Yep.
Good answer. Good answer.
Okay, so Ralph, how about you? An office rule that everybody has to respect for the day.
An office rule that everyone would have to respect for the day. I like meetings finishing on time. That's a good one from Kathleen. So I'd pile on to that.
Was that our unexpected question?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because my day is always really long because I have, Chinese customers in the morning and Americans in the evening. It's kind of, so for me, I'd like a rule where my day is 9 to 5 for a change. How's that?
I like that one.
People should show up on time.
It would be nice.
Okay. Yeah, I'm here. I was just laughing that people should show up on time. What's the unexpected question?
If you can make an office rule that everybody has to stick to for a day, what would it be?
I think I'm going to go with they start at a reasonable hour, they finish at a reasonable hour, and they act a lunch hour.
I'll pick a rule that actually meets the topic of this episode. I want contracts to be submitted for review and in time and with editable documents. Not just a PDF that I can look at, but a Word document that I can actually redline.
I second that strongly.
You did not ask for a miracle for the day.
Hey, I can impose a rule for one day. Maybe people will learn.
Perfect.
We like that. So before we talk about Kathleen, then I believe there's been a certain amount of news this week involving a certain amount of clock ticking company. So Paul, I'm sure you've got more to tell us about the state of the U.S. appeals court.
Yeah, we have actually two big updates relating to TikTok, and we've talked about TikTok before. The possibility that the U.S. government might impose a ban on TikTok being active in the United States, or whether ByteDance, the mother company out of China, would need to divest its interest, at least for TikTok, in the United States, but then probably for all over the world, since this is a social medium that's hard to break up. And legislation has been proposed for that in Congress, which TikTok has now appealed before the courts. And last week, the U.S. Court of Appeals has said that they will uphold the nationwide TikTok ban. Whether they like it or not, they have even indicated that they don't really like it because there is a freedom of speech issue here. But they have also said that Congress, in all their wisdom, that is my paraphrasing, but that Congress in all their wisdom has said, this is the right thing to do, so this is how we should move forward. And indeed, TikTok will get their nationwide ban as of January 19, 2025. This case will now probably go to the U.S. Supreme Court, but whether they will be able to make a decision in time, that remains to be seen. At the same time, more or less, the Supreme Court in Romania announced that they have annulled the first round of the presidential elections because of influencing of those elections by Russia through TikTok. So it's very interesting to see you have a freedom of speech issue. At the same time, you also have a democracy issue. What will happen there? For those of you who want to know more about the Romanian situation, because that is also heavily criticized, I suggest you read the blog that Gabriela Zanfir wrote on LinkedIn on what this means also for democracy in Romania, which, of course, after only 35 years since the 35 years since the collapse of the Berlin Wall, is still very much in its infancy, I would say. So yeah, TikTok is massively under fire, both in the US and in the EU.
I mean, and to be fair, with the Romanian issue, it wasn't just TikTok. It was TikTok. It was also Telegram as well. A number of social media outlets that have been looked at for the, as being influenced. The pro-Russian candidate, and even though the pro-Russian candidate had declared zero campaign spending, which I thought was a really interesting factor in the story. So even though the Russian campaign, had obviously, paid or promoted on social media, when in country they'd declared zero spending. So, the sort of democracy threatening of how a foreign country could potentially, politically destabilize elections is always going to be a fascinating sort of topic for spend, especially, we've had elections in the UK this year. Kay, of course, you've had elections in the US this year. You always wonder how much of what you see you can trust and where the genesis of that is, right?
An hour ago, a little over an hour ago, TikTok has filed a appeal to pause the ruling, meaning it won't take effect until the Supreme Court decides to take up the case or not, arguing of an opportunity to decide whether to read this except before the law takes effect. And they actually stated the pause would give the incoming Trump administration time to weigh in on the legal dispute.
Interesting, because of course, divestiture is set for January 19, whereas the Trump administration comes in on January 20th. We'll see what happens there. And with that out of the way, let's turn back to the real topic of today's conversation, and that is dealing with vendors. Kathleen, you already mentioned you've been working with privacy contracting and vendors for a long time, for many years. What is the biggest challenge? What is the biggest challenge that you see in dealing with these kinds of contracts?
I think before we even get to the substance, it's the fight with the other side about whose form to use. And, I understand from both perspectives, this one is tailored to what we offer. And, from the vendor side, it's we want to make sure that everybody's on the same paper and keep it simple. And I've worked for a number of different sized organizations, some very small, some very large, and it's the same battle wherever you go. And I think, all of us are fighting the same fight. I think if all of us can be a little bit more understanding and a little bit flexible, realizing that everybody has the same issue. Everybody wants to have some sort of standardized template to make it easy to know what's in your contracts and for, just contract administration purposes. It doesn't really make sense, as you said, Paul, earlier in this podcast, just to send a PDF and expect somebody not to propose changes, right? It doesn't do anybody justice. So even before we get to what's in the contracts themselves, I think it's just figuring out whose form to use from the get-go has been one of the most challenges. That's, everywhere I've been.
And are you then the lawyer that still insists on using your paper because that's the contract that you've drafted as a template?
We try for it. And I will say that's obviously the ideal situation. But I also understand that a one-size-fits-all contract doesn't work for all of our customers. We have, very large financial institutions to very small, just mom and pop shops that have websites that want to make sure that they're compliant. And so I think that really kind of taking yes, this is what we're going to go for, but let's look at individual circumstances it's helpful.
So with my European head on, we've kind of got this concept of controller and processor, this idea that your controller is this sort of big bad organization that can look at its subcontractors down the supply chain and kind of tell them what to do and enforce contract stipulations on them. One of the biggest problems we have, of course, is when your processor is bigger than your controller. When you're dealing with a cloud provider like Microsoft or Amazon, and they just say, sign our contract, we're bigger than you are. So I'm just wondering, what's your experience, Kathleen, of dealing with different sizes of organizations? How much does that affect the power when you're with standard contracts from standard service providers?
Yeah, it certainly does. Prior to being at TrustArc, I was with Snowflake. We're, a decent sized organization, but we too had larger companies that were, larger than us, that we had to fight the battle of forms and agree to what we could and say, hey, we're not going to just sign your paper blindly. And we tried to put up the fight no matter where we were. And I think that, there is some of that. There is some sort of large organizations, we have no negotiating room. But I have found if you get to the right people, and it's usually not within the procurement department, if you can get to the actual legal department, people are more understanding of the situation and what roles each party plays. And they're more likely to be like, okay, we can put some modifications in there. But I think in large part, it's also getting to the right person when you're with those larger organizations. When you're smaller, usually people are doing double duty, and it's like, people that might have privacy contracting also have vendor procurement. Like it depends upon the company you're working with.
Do you have any tricks on how to get to the right people? How to get through that massive sales organization of big tech and get to their legal team?
Beg?
Instead of hearing time and time again, our legal doesn't take customer calls.
I have found work all angles. It might not be through you as the attorney. If you have an account manager or an account rep, and maybe they can work through the sales equivalent on the opposite side, sometimes they'll have a better chance of reaching out directly. But it's really, navigating the organizational structure of whatever you're looking at. And if it reverts to pleading and begging, it's not beneath me.
Yeah, not above bleeding both. And is there any sort of particular clauses that you find more problematic than others? Is it, anything about, I don't know, international transfers, or is it about security, or is it about, because I often wonder.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, one part that's often overlooked, because maybe from the lawyer's perspective, they might not understand everything that goes into it, is the audit clause. I think that that's one that I've looked at very closely no matter where I am, because it's something you have to work in conjunction with your security team on, and it has to be reasonable. And I think a lot of times I've seen younger attorneys be like, all right, they have the right to audit, limit it to once per year. And, that's fine no matter. But, I've seen people try to get some pretty robust audit clauses through about like monitoring and the ability to come in whenever. And if you think about that from a business perspective, how disruptive that could be to just the regular operation of running a business, especially for a smaller security team and legal team. So I really try to, limit that in a way, like from our side, so that it won't be disruptive to our business. And of course, I try to be pretty judicious when asking for the right to audit on the opposite side as well, because I believe that you give what you get. And, I'm not going to turn around and then ask for unrestricted audit rights from someone else if I'm not willing to give, something that's, pretty similar. So I think that's one clause that I've seen often overlooked, that there's a lot of meat there to pick through. And again, it's not just the legal teams. You have to work with other teams in your organization. And so, I don't know, maybe it's wise to circle up and focus with the security team once or twice a year and look at those clauses, see what customers have done. Has it been disruptive? Like, what can we do to make sure that customers are provided with the same level of assurance, but aren't going to be overly reaching?
And that is when you are the vendor, right? That is when you are the service provider.
Yep. Yeah.
Have you ever experienced that a customer outside of data breach situations would actually come in and say, hey, we are going to audit you?
Fortunately, no. Let's keep it that way.
Because that's always my wonder, right? We have these clauses, but does anybody really have the time and the resources to actually go look at their vendors and say, okay, well, this year we are going to audit Jira, or this year we are going to audit our contract management system or our customer system, just to see on their end whether all their security features are doing what they should do and whether their privacy features are doing what they should do. Who has the time for that?
I've got some experience of that, actually. Especially not just in data protection, but in the ISO 27001 experience. You look at supply chain assurance, and one of the things you say is, well, I know my security boundaries working okay. What about when I pass data on to the next step and the next step and the next step? And it's about levels of assurance. So you always say, what's the risk? What's the risk? And if some people, you might want a person in every day. Other people, you might want an audit. Other people, you might be comfortable with seeing third-party certifications and audits. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, especially with the bigger providers, is these trust centers now. Let's put a trust center online where we put up all of the badges and third-party certifications and audits that we have. And then we say, well, what could you possibly audit us on that we're not audited on already? Yeah. Look at our trust center. And actually, with some of the bigger providers, I mean, Microsoft is the classic here. They don't even put the right to audit in their contract. They say, no, because we've provided all of this trust, all of this assurance. Are you happy with that, Kathleen? Happy with that when someone says, here's all my certifications and badges online, therefore you don't need a right to audit in your contract?
I think it really depends. Not everybody has a trust center, so to speak, or one that's as robust as one might want when you're looking for certain assurances. So, I mean, I think it depends would be my answer. Like, I think, for those that do have robust trust centers.
Truly a data protection practitioner.
Yeah. For those that have a lot of information available online, then I could see how that would be, that would work. But not everyone has them. I mean, at TrustArc, we actually provide a trust center because a lot of smaller organizations don't have the ability to build their own trust center in-house. And we found that they can answer a lot of the questions that you said and head off intense audit before we get to that point. But it really depends. I don't think it's a one size fits all for there.
I will say I looked at it and I liked it because it's something I've always believed in. So I like it.
It puts control into the hands of the legal professionals, maybe with our organization, many, to be able to provide all the documents that Ralph just described that, gives assurances right from the get-go, but also allows legal to respond to our ever-changing privacy regulatory landscape and to make edits like to your privacy policy, to your SSA, to whatever that might be in real time. And I think this is something that I'm pretty passionate about because in another role, I worked for a mortgage loan originator, a financial institution. And our CEO wanted to change the data sharing practices, and we had to make an update in the privacy policy and our GLBA disclosure. And in order to do that, I had to go through engineering to be able to change that online. And we were so overwhelmed, that would have been like 2 sprints down the line. Then from providing notice, we had to wait 30 days in order to start that data sharing practice, right? And it was a long period of time. If I had had a trust center, I would have been able to go and make the 1 or 2 sentence update and start the clock ticking on that 30-day notice before being able to share the data. So, it's like I said, privacy is not in a bubble. It's interdependent with different parts of the organization. But I think one place that you can take it out of if you need to is engineering, right? We're the lawyers. We should be able to make edits and be able to be pretty nimble. And the trust center is one area that allows us to do that. Now, if you're a larger organization, you have to build your trust center in-house. And some people have the bandwidth to do that. Not a lot of people do. And so that's why we provide, a trust center as it's one of our components that people can purchase so that it's a no-code, easy repository where you can put all of your trust documents in one area from legal to security to whatever that might be.
It's okay. You have worked for many service providers. Would this be something that, you already said you love the idea, but how would you work with it in your day-to-day?
Well, and that's the one thing you got to think about it. One is you've got RFPs, RFIs, customer due diligence, new contracts flying out the door left and right. And Ralph, you said earlier, or Paul, you said earlier, you wish contracts would come to you at a timely basis. I would want RFPs to come to me on a timely basis.
I want RFPs to be done at all.
Yeah, they want you to redline the contract as well as answer all these questions, as well as do a bunch of other things. It'd be really, really nice. And I have worked with the company we all know and love that the people answering the RFP questions, and these are any companies we know and love, the people answering the RFP questions don't understand the questions. Even when you give them stock answers, one of the common ones I see is, do you share my data or outsource my data to a third party? Consistently, the answer is no. It doesn't matter what company I've worked at. Consistently, the answer is no from the RFP people. So a trust center...
Consistently, that is wrong.
It's always wrong because no one hosts their own email anymore. I mean, even if it's just business contact information, you're outsourcing the data. So one thing that it does is it puts all the consistent documentation in one place so everybody is working from the same documentation. Nobody has to worry about a policy's been updated or something has changed. Now, you're still going to get the people that are going to say no, but you can also work to educate that and you can reduce a lot of errors. The problem is there are a lot of really large companies and a lot of startup companies tech startup companies do this too, have public trust centers where anybody can go to their trust center and see what it is that they have available, their policies for vendors, their policies for customers, their everything. Not a lot of companies want to be that available for what their policies are. Now, y'all, Ralph and Paul, have known this for a long time, that I firmly believe policies need to be written at a level that can be shared both upstream with customers and downstream with vendors.
Yep.
You don't want to put the crown jewels in the policies that you need to share.
Agreed.
But customers have to do due diligence. You have to require vendors to do certain things. How can you do that if you can't share your policies?
Yeah.
So put the confidential stuff, the really, really critical, vulnerable stuff in a protocol or a process or a guidance document or a playbook or whatever you want to call your supporting documents, but have your policy very high level with enough detail to where it's meaningful. Don't just say thou shalt protect data and think that that qualifies. It doesn't. But put a nice policy in a place that you can share both upstream and downstream. And that's where I believe a trust center really, really comes in handy. Not to mention, you can list all of your sub-processors by region or by business unit in a document. What did they do? What's their contact information? And I swear, and I know y'all are going to say this, when you get a contract that says, and if you want updates on our vendors, you'll subscribe to our page, and your customers all go, oh, hell no, we're not. You can you subscribe your customer to the page.
Yeah.
Don't require them to do it. You sign them up, and essentially like an RSS feed, exactly like an RSS feed. If there is a change to that page of who a sub-processor is or what they do, or add one or change one, it will automatically notify everybody. And then you just have to track your time from there as to whether or not you get any objections in. But be as business friendly as you possibly can. I so wanted to start my own vendor oversight company with a whole bunch of tools that would make it easy for everyone. I'm not a tech brain. I don't know how to do this stuff.
I wanted to say, how good are you at coding?
I suck at it. And I wanted to use AI back before it was really popular. So someone in high school could probably design it for me now. But the problem is it takes so much time away from vendors to answer all these questions. And it takes time away from customers to actually do the due diligence and then to do them on a recurring basis according to the risk of the company. And then to do them whenever the company commits to doing something by a certain time that you have a trigger to go ask them if they did that thing. So vendor management, very much third-party risk management, very much a passion of mine, which is one reason why I not only run our privacy program for Crawford, but I also run the TPRM, and not for the privacy aspects, but the entire program across the globe. And so I'm also very passionate about this, and I love the Trust Center idea that TrustArc is running out.
Sorry, what is the
Absolutely
TPR?
Third-party risk management. First time I've ever worked at a company that used those acronyms, but I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. It's TPRM. Unfortunately, though, I did have to change the policy to make sure that it's clear that, yes, third parties are more than just vendors, but we are going to focus on vendors.
I'm going to double down on what Kay just said, actually, and be sort of grumpy about word usage. Words have definitions to me. And so I've noticed, I've noticed that in the US, there tends to be the word policy tends to mean documentation in general. Working at ISO committee, the definition of policy is a statement of management intention as formally expressed by that top management. And so you're right, in the traditional sense of the word policy, it should never contain the detail. I can give out my policies because they're only aspirational, intentional. And the detail will fall into procedures that I wouldn't publish externally. So I'm just doubling and backing up your point with the meaning of the word. And returning to Kathleen, because we've just waxed lyrical for a while.
That's what you get when you bring me here and I'm not here for half the show because my internet stinks.
I'm going to ask a sneaky question now, and this comes from my EU point of view. And from an EU point of view, it's all about the data subject and risk of harm to the individual, right? So sometimes my question about all of the legal counsel contractual shenanigans, redlining, let's get it ready till both of our legal counsels are happy and we'll both sign it off and then walk away both happy with the contract. What changes? The data subject carries on with the same product and process that they were always going to be given. So I'm going to challenge you now, Kathleen, in terms of how much of what we see in the legal and the contracts world actually filters through into practical improvement to a product or service for the individual.
That's a very good question. To your point, I don't think much changes from the individual user or individual's perspective. But
Right.
I think, what can change though is that what you have in the contract, whether or not it can be actually fulfilled, is of utmost importance. And I think that, you can sign your life away to certain things in a contract, but when push comes to shove, you might not be able to fulfill those obligations. And how I'm thinking the way that might filter through would be something with breach notification, right? Like if you have, everybody wants to be
That comes to mind for all of us.
Yeah. So if you want to be immediately notified, if there is even a hint of a breach of security, it's okay. Is that going to filter down to the customer necessarily? It's it's up to the controller to decide whether or not they're going to notify the individual. But is it practically important to them? Maybe not, right? It's if you actually say hi, I will notify you within 48 hours of a confirmed breach, that's more relevant to what might actually affect the individual down the line. So I don't think in operating as one should normally operate, nothing would really change necessarily for the individual rights. But I think that if you especially around breach notification, the practical implications of that can affect them down the line, but I don't think you're going to feel it right from the everyday get-go.
Good answer.
Yeah, I fully agree there.
Being honest, yeah.
Ralph?
Yeah, so this is always got to be the interesting thing because I always say, how does it affect people? And so, but obviously sometimes contracts are there to protect the organization, right? So what are the times where you've hit hard red lights, right? What are the times where the other company's gone, no, this and no further? I mean, are you ever under any pressure as a contracts lawyer to say, well, we'll walk away then? Or is it that, no, this is the product and service we're going to go with, and you can only change it to a certain extent, and we're going with them whatever? So what power do you really have? And have you ever been in that situation where you're going to go, no, this is too risky, we're going to walk away, we're not going to take on this customer? Or, when do they dig in as to the point where you go, no, we're going to make another choice?
Well, I think our job as attorneys is to be counsel. And at a certain point, right, we can counsel as to the risk, but ultimately risk boils down to financial risk. And that's a business decision. So yes, I've come up to that, instance many, many times throughout my career. And at a certain point, you have to run it up the chain. And whether it be your CFO, your CEO, whoever is, the end of the line in your organization with regards to financial risk, you can counsel them to the risk that's, written in the contract. And I think that it's a risk decision at a certain point, and business has to weigh in. So at any of my organizations, the buck doesn't stop with legal, right? We can say, I wouldn't do this. I would strongly advise against this. I would document that wholeheartedly.
And if it's unethical,
right.
I'm leaving.
Yeah, exactly. But if it's like I said earlier, if it's the difference between immediately and promptly, and we can't get off that or something, where it's not an ethical consideration. Yeah.
Well, I will say that there was a situation one time where I gave up part of a holiday because business insisted that a certain contract had to be done by the end of the year. And if we didn't get it to them by Christmas, then they weren't going to be able to do it by the end of the year. And in going through, so I gave up my holiday for this company long time, but it stuck with me to do this. And it was interesting that the business was the one insisting on getting this done. And yet they kept saying these things about, well, the vendor has now moved us from third in line to seventh in line. And I'm like, are you really sure you want to do business with this vendor? Because when you get bad vibes from a vendor during a negotiation at the end of the year, when they have to hit quotas, they ain't going to get any nicer than this. 3 months later, the contract was still not signed because of other details, despite the fact that we went head over foot to give it to them. 3 months after that, my time may be wrong because, my memory's getting old. But quickly after that, it was within the first year, they decided that they weren't able to use this vendor because the vendor couldn't do X, Y, or Z or wouldn't do X, Y, or Z. And so it's kind of like the lesson out of Blindside. If you don't love it in the store, don't buy it because that's where you're going to love it the most. So that's when you negotiate, is when they want your business, you want them, everybody's singing Kumbaya and everything, because it's going to go bad. And when it goes bad, that's when you fall back to the contract.
So Kathleen, of course, when we are negotiating, we all have the goal in mind. We reach agreement and then we are satisfied. But some contracts are more satisfying than others when you negotiate. I'm sure you recognize that feeling as well. A bit of I got this done.
I can't even laugh. I'm so sick, Paul. Stop.
Is there any particular topic where you say, if I can get this done, that makes me really chuffed for this contract?
Where I get it done. I mean, I think, because we're a small legal team, I handle both commercial and privacy aspects of all contract negotiations. At other organizations, like when I was at Snowflake, I just did the commercial aspects of privacy. So commercial negotiations were left to a different team. I think the interplay with like the limitation of liability or indemnification section, and if there is a DPA that's signed with the commercial contract, the interplay of those two is probably, if we can get that squared away, then we can figure out the rest of everything else. But yeah, it's, I've seen some astronomical asks and numbers for maybe a breach of confidentiality, which in our case isn't even customer data. It's just confidential data. And it's, if you can come to the meeting of the minds, I think with those sections, then the rest can fall into place.
Consensus ad idem. Well, my basic contract law from university just flashed before my mind. So sorry. Offer acceptance, meeting of minds.
To mind, I'm really happy if I manage this.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's about, as always, protection of the individuals, right? And so, going back to my earlier question, I always look at things like international transfer agreements and contracts with a degree of, how does this change the product and service to the individual, right? What controls or what safeguards are this going to make that's going to help the individual? And I always get slightly frustrated when, when I think that, we can redline everything we want, but the product or service is going to be exactly the same. And I kind of get it from the point of view of a big vendor. I've got one cloud system and I've got one product and I'm going to deliver in a certain way and I'm not going to recode it just for you. I kind of get that, So what bugs me, I guess, is when you're sometimes left with a choice. As Kathleen was saying, we are just advisors. We are just counsel. And so what that means is quite often the business has already made a decision. We're left to pick up the pieces. It's kind of like, well, we're going with this product and make it work, make it legal, make it data protection friendly. We're like,
at least on paper.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And so paper-based compliance is always something that bothers me. So I think actually where I've been most satisfied is when I've been able to get in early enough to advise on the requirements pre-contract, to be able to get in before there's a product in mind, before there's a service in mind, where I've been able to kind of shape the conversation as to what the requirements are we're looking for. Because sometimes people will come with a vendor in mind and they've already signed the contract and then basically there's not much you can do at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So actually
case point to the RFP, be involved in the RFP in the first place.
Yeah, the earlier you can get in, the more you can get in on the design aspects, DPAAs early as requirements documents, all that kind of good stuff. Then when the contract stuff comes on, you've already selected a provider who meets 90% of your requirements, right? Yes, there's got to be 10% that perhaps no one can meet or you need to negotiate. But, the earlier you can get in, the better. I think that would be my advice. It's, I was always taught contract management had 4 stages, due diligence, take you out for dinner and see if this is a person you're interested in, right? Contract, let's formalize in front of a judge and jury of your peers and make sure that you're happy to go off on a relationship together. Then there's contract assurance, which is checking in every hour again, going out for dinner and making you've still got to operate without this person's platform or whatever else. So perhaps as a final question from me, Kathleen, do you ever see, any interest in the termination side did you have to sort of think with your crystal ball about what's going to happen, much, much later, if it all goes horribly wrong, or people change to another provider, what happens on the termination end of the contract?
Absolutely. And I think one thing that your question is timely right now, because it's something I've started to see in a number of contracts, is these extended periods of time with which customers can retrieve their data or also want transition services free of charge for maybe 6 months or a year after the contract ends. And I think, you do have to think it through. And is it reasonable to suspect that, a vendor A is do you want them holding on to your data for a whole year on the off chance that, at some point, 7 months down the line, you may have selected your next vendor and you can transition to it. As I look at some of these asks of people, recently, I'm like, have you thought this all through? I think convenience wise, you might just want to make sure somebody's got it until you make your next move if all things go south. From us, not from the company's perspective, right? We don't want to hang on to your data because there's liability for us. You probably don't want us hanging on to your data longer than is necessary because that may trigger all sorts of different, regulatory issues. But you start to see that customers, at least from our side, have wanted that. And I'm like, have you thought all of that through? Not exactly sure, right? So I don't know. It's something that's very timely that I've started to see more and more so is on the termination end, not as crystal clear, maybe termination or deletion or, destruction or return on such and such a date. But it's kind of this nebulous, termination services. You will hold on to our data for as long as we tell you until we're ready for it to go elsewhere. And I find that very bizarre.
Yeah.
Fully agreed again. Yeah. I always look for those termination clauses in my agreements, to be honest, making sure that data is securely deleted or returned, or first returned and then securely deleted, because the return is always in a digital format. So there will always be a copy still there. And what I find particularly annoying that you see more and more these clauses. Yeah, we reserve the right to keep your data if we are under a certain legal obligation, without specifying at all what kind of obligations those may be. So I also try to put in clarifications on that point in the contract, that at least at the time the contract ends, it is made clear if that clause is invoked, and if so, on what legal provisions and how long the data would then be retained, just to ensure that we have some clarity when our data in the end should be deleted. On that note, that's all we have time for today. So we'll wrap up another episode of Serious Privacy. Kathleen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And if people want to know more about the trust centers, they can find that on TrustArc's website, right?
Yes, they can.
And we'll provide a link as well, of course.
Okay, we'll provide a link in the show notes. So thank you all. If you like the podcast, you can find us on LinkedIn under Serious Privacy. You will find us on Blue Sky as well. The podcast at seriousprivacy.eu, Ralph at igr.o'brien.seriousprivacy.eu, me as europolb.seriousprivacy.eu, and Kay as heartofprivacy.bsky.social, because we haven't had the time to move her over, but we will do so shortly. So then she'll also have a Serious Privacy domain. In any case, you can find all of us on Blue Sky. No more on X. You'll find TrustArc wherever you find TrustArc. Until next week, goodbye.
Bye, y'all.
Goodbye.
That was Serious Privacy.
If you're a data protection or privacy professional, you already know the pressure. Non-stop regulatory change, AI oversight, internal demands, and the expectation to somehow stay ahead of it all. And the old patchwork of tools just isn't cutting it anymore.
No, That's why TrustArc created a modern privacy management platform powered by Arc Intelligence. The TrustArc platform brings your workflows, evidence, research, tasks, and applications all together in one unified and intelligent workspace so you don't waste time digging, clicking, or context switching.
With Ask Arc, your privacy assistant, you can ask plain language questions about laws, jurisdictions, or even your own program data and get credible, cited answers based on NIMBY research and more than 1,000 global laws. It's explainable, transparent, and purpose-built for data protection and privacy.
So if you need to add a vendor, create a cookie banner, or start an assessment, quick actions take formally complex tasks, turn them into bite-sized guided workflows to save you time.
It's a platform that thinks like you, works like you, and helps you move faster with confidence, whether you're a seasoned DPO or you're just getting started.
See how modern privacy gets done. Explore Arc at trustarc.com/serious-privacy. That's trustarc.com/serious-privacy.